Judy, I think you're supposed to start.
I think we're online.
I was playing some music for you. Thank you. You know, I was kind of staring down at Akshay here, but anyway. So I was playing some music for you. Thank you. You know, I was kind of staring down at Akshay here, but let's restart this again. Hugh, are you playing for us Merry Christmas?
No. Kids are asleep.
Okay.
Music.
Okay. Thank you, everyone who's joining us live. We have a big panel here, and I was a little distracted about some music that was playing in my background, really. And so sorry for the snafu in the startup. I'm really excited to be moderating this panel on pathways to careers in AI, in clinical AI. You have lots of people who've been on previously and new faces. So I'm going to actually just go down and give a minute for people to introduce themselves as they answer the first question, which is a bachelor's or master's degree enough to do for a career in AI in medicine, or should students aim for an MD or PhD? So in your introduction, please state your credentials and, you know, and then try and answer this question. Please, if you're joining us live on YouTube, use the chat to answer the questions. Else I'll have to answer my questions and ask them. And so, which is never fun in moderating. And I can go first. My name is Judy. I'm a professor at Emory University. And I came to the AI pathway. I'm still trying to come to the AI pathway. And my journey is really medical school, master's in clinical informatics, and then subsequently, you know, a little bit of self-taught things along the way. And but I don't have a PhD, but I am a comfortable programmer. But what I'm great at is looking for other programmers to help me with my problem. Okay, so we're gonna go. Hugh, do you wanna go next?
Sure, yes, hello, I'm Hugh. So yeah, I trained as a radiologist, and then I did a postgraduate MD degree. It's kind of like a mini PhD, I suppose. And one of the projects I was on was using UNets for segmentation for prostate imaging, and that's kind of how I got into AI. I then left clinical and academic medicine and went into industry. So I went a separate route than a lot of the academics do, and now I run my own business in the AI field.
Awesome. Akshay?
Yeah, so my name's Akshay. I'm a faculty at Stanford here. And I have always loved school, apparently. I got my PhD right after my undergrad, and I decided to stay on as a postdoc doing medical research. And most of the skill sets that I built were in signal processing and image analysis. And to answer your question, Judy, I think this might be a bit of a cop-out, but I think it's less about the degree than what you do. I think there's a lot of PhDs and MDs who have technical skills. But just because you don't have a PhD doesn't mean that you don't have the technical skills. If you're able to work on a project during your undergrad or during your master's project, I think that can help you go a pretty long way in trying to build up the tool sets that you need to be able to have a successful career in clinical medicine.
Awesome. Matt Lungren.
Yeah, hi, I'm Matt Lungren. I'm a radiologist, so I practice at Stanford and also help co-direct the AIMI Center here. And I have a degree in both medicine and public health, but I do not have any formal training in computer science. I think that, you know, again, sort of similar to what Akshay pointed out, I think coming from the medical side into this arena, I think it's easy to maybe underappreciate the contributions that you have from a domain expert, you know, a practicing physician, and some of the insights that you might be able to gain. And I think that really any background that's curious and interested, either with, you know, available resources or just the opportunity to work with multidisciplinary teams, I think can be successful in this field. And I know we'll get into it more later today, but I certainly wouldn't I certainly wouldn't put a degree as a barrier to have a fruitful career in this space.
Okay. Nafisa?
Hi, Nafisa. I'm a program manager at Facebook AI research team. I also agree with many of the people here. The degree doesn't really, it is not a definitive decision on getting into AI in medical space. I come from a hybrid of medicine and machine learning myself, and that's where I currently work, in the intersection of combining two fields. And I think we can go more into that in detail later. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you and welcome. Karley?
Sure, I think I have maybe an unusual path for this group, but my name's Karley. I'm the VP and General Manager at GE Healthcare for our AI work across the businesses. And my background by education is biomedical engineering, and then after work in digital health for a while, I went back and got what maybe in some groups is a negative degree, but I went back and got an MBA and have been applying that knowledge at GE Healthcare. And I think I'll reflect what a lot of folks have said. It takes a lot of skill sets to do this right, not just the science, but the application of the science and how you can scale that to impact people at a global scale. So there's a lot of different paths you can take to make an impact in this space. And I'm eager for the different voices and perspectives that we'll be able to have over the next hour. So thanks for having me on.
Awesome. Sharon?
Hi, I'm Sharon. I don't think any degree I have really means much. Like, I have a computer science bachelor's and I'm doing an AI PhD right now. But I feel like the most I've learned were just not things that I learned in school. They were things I learned on the job or in collaborations. And I think those were the most fruitful and also the most valuable experiences I had in terms of bringing me into this intersection. So I encourage people to think about it that way.
Okay. Last and not least, Luke.
Yeah, hi, I'm Luke. I'm down in Australia. I'm a radiologist and I'm doing a PhD in AI as well. Yeah, look, I agree with everyone else. Yeah, I think that you can come from it from any direction. You can be a doctor coming in or a health professional coming in. You can be a CS person or data scientist coming in or a coder of any sort. And for any of those groups, all you have to be willing to do is learn as you go. That you don't know enough when you start, no matter which side you come from. And the degree itself doesn't really matter that much. So yeah, just get in and be excited.
Okay. Turns out I'm counting down on African time, which really means it's not the end, you know? So Olivia, really, I'm sorry. You are the person of the moment. Sorry.
No worries at all. Yeah. So I'm an engineer at Nines, which is a teleradiology company aimed to bring really high quality software and machine learning to the teleradiology space. And I don't have a master's, PhD, postdoc, anything. I graduated with a bachelor's in computer science. And so I definitely agree with the sentiment here. I think it really depends on what you want to work on. And I think there's a lot of ways to make a lot of impact in this field without necessarily having a degree. But on the flip side, I think, you know, a degree, if you want to specialize in something, can be helpful. And I think it just really depends on finding what you want to do.
Okay. So lots of questions are coming actually through the chat. And, you know, something that Sharon said, really, I think we need to unpack a little more is, for example, if you're a medical student, this is Gagan, thank you for joining us. For a medical student applying to ophthalmology, what do you think are pathways to pursue to strengthen competency in AI? I'm not going to pick on anyone really, just to allow maybe one or two people to respond, and then we have quite a number of questions coming through.
Might be promoting my advisor too much, but I would start with watching Andrew Ng's machine learning videos. You can learn all of this on your own. Or do I see like head shakes? Okay, well, yeah. You can learn all this on your own. I actually have never taken a formal machine learning course. He knows this too. I haven't completed a full thing. So I don't think you necessarily need to do that. I think it's figuring out how do you learn best, one. Second, if it is in a really formal education setting, then you probably do want to try to apply to some of these programs or like start to work with some people, but the resources are completely online and free. Like there are enough resources to get started on your own as well. And partnering up and buddying up, I think is always fun and does get you somewhere.
Okay, I would say that I could not complete his course. I just couldn't, and it wasn't for the lack of trying. I even paid for it, and money could still not make me complete his course. So I'm curious to what other people think.
Could I jump in here? I'm involved in curriculum development at the Australian College of Radiology for AI. And so this question of how do doctors in particular, people in opthal training, for example, get into it is something sort of we're working on. And I think the question you have to ask is, what do you want to do in the field? There's lots of different things a doctor can do in the field. You don't have to be a coder to be involved in the field, and several members of this panel don't code at all and are doctors. So look, I think the basic thing that everyone should know is probably doable within a couple of hours of training. You know, the broad concepts of AI, but beyond that, you can learn more about AI to be involved in procurement and deployment and monitoring, or you can do medical research in AI where you test systems, or you can do coding. And all of those things are possible for doctors. So all of those have different entry requirements and different knowledge requirements. But the basic level for everybody, I think, even to be involved in some basic research is probably doable in under, say, 10 hours of self-study.
I agree with Luke entirely. I think you need to step back and think, okay, you want to work in AI in your career, but there's a really broad range of what that actually means. And I think a lot of people focus on the coding side. And it is my experience that it's very rare to get a good doctor to be a very good coder. There are a few, don't get me wrong, but that's hard to do. And I think, as Luke has said, as Sharon has implied, there's a broader skill set, and there's so much that anyone can bring to the table. And I also want to say that I think the number one thing is it has to be a genuine passion and curiosity of yours. I guarantee that everyone on this panel has done things completely free of charge in their own free time towards, doing stuff in the AI field. None of us see it as a chore or, a job. It's fun, and we wake up in the morning and go, great, this is exciting. And you should only consider career in AI if you wake up in the morning and are excited about it. Don't do it because you're jumping on a bandwagon and you think it's the cool thing to do.
Dr. Lungren, are you going to brag about your course, you and Sharon?
Well, I wanted to echo everyone else's comments because it is the people that I feel like I enjoy working with the most, and I think are truly bringing a lot of joy to the equation are those that, just like Hugh had commented on. For example, I have an English major background, right? I have really no business even really, initially, if you look at the degrees only, really trying to work in this field. And I think that the way I've approached it is multiple, disciplines coming together, coming up with great ideas and treating it almost as a creative initiative. One of the things I love about the field is that there's an immense creativity. And for me, that pushes my buttons because I'm very into that aspect of it and trying to reinvent things. And so I think it's a big opportunity. I will say though, to Judy's point earlier about the formal degree thing, I think I might be old school or just old, but it is hard for me to complete, some of these sort of non-structured courses. I mean, there's a million things on YouTube and I'm like, oh, that looks cool. And I kind of go through it and then I'm like, okay, I either lose track or I move on to something else, and maybe it's my attention span. So I do like that there, are a lot of efforts trying to look at how can we formalize this in a way that is not necessarily comprehensive, but at least has a completeness to it, a finite end. And maybe Judy, maybe you can't finish the course, but I think that you probably accomplished potentially more than just maybe only ad hoc. But I also have to say that most of my learning has come from the interactions with, my seniors, certainly mentors, but also the students I get to work with and all of you on this call who I've worked with. So, and that, I guess, again, back to the idea of passion, it really is fun. We tried to make a course that addressed where I would have wanted what I would have wanted to know when I started, having no background in this, not really loving math, at least not having a great relationship with math, and certainly not being a coder, and just trying to tie it to principles that we deal with all the time from the medical perspective, in the sense that we use technologies that we don't necessarily know how to build, but we know how to apply them effectively. We know where they work, we know where they don't. And that was kind of the sort of the foundation behind that course. And if I could go back, there's things that I'd want to add or take away. And it's certainly not perfect, but it's an initial step. And I suspect there'll be a lot more of this to come. And again, if it's something you love, it doesn't feel like work. I know that's a cliche, but that's honestly how I feel about this field and why I enjoy it so much.
So Olivia, you're working with radiologists all the time, right? And you're an engineer embedded in radiologists. I mean, I do believe, actually, I am in an academic institution, but one of the things that I think one of the areas that apt to uptaking, technology and testing is Telerads. So tell us what you're seeing there before we move on to something else.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And I think actually COVID has been a really great example of the world shifting towards like a telehealth world. And I think, working in these kind of companies where like an engineer can work directly with a radiologist is absolutely like the, moving forward, and is how, the world's going to work. And I would say there's no radiologist at my company who's coding. That's not their expertise, and that's not what they're there for. But, we're working hand in hand. So when we're building a product, we're getting their feedback. What do they think about this? How do they like perceive, something showing up? And they'll have a completely different perspective because they're thinking from the medical side, whereas I'm thinking about it from, and as an engineer, like, this is the best way to produce this, and I think like kind of, blending those two worlds together is like definitely the best thing. And it's all, I think, about curiosity and like asking questions. I don't think either of us expect the other to have all the domain expertise that the other has.
But I'm just going to ask you a follow-up question, actually.
Yeah.
Judy's trying to redeem myself, so it's just gonna be me and you talking the whole
Let's do it.
But my question is, what are some of the, like, I don't want us at the end of this hour to just have like, oh, it's easy, maybe you don't need a degree or you need a degree. Like, what are some actual tangible things that you're seeing people, when you think about, man, I love working with Judy, you would, but what are things that Judy brings to the, to the table that you're like, man, that was really good. Something that you think that people who are watching can actually maybe invest time in to learn.
I would say, I think, just like, kind of like, I think what we were kind of going back to is like understanding at a broad level, what these AI systems are doing. And I think like, we really don't necessarily, you don't need to understand, like all the intricacies and even, like how to code at all. But I think having like a broad level of like, what does an AI model do? Like, what does it mean when it outputs something? Should I trust this model? And like kind of an idea just to like how to talk about these sorts of things. And I think, some of the resources that Sharon like talked about with like Andrew Ng, or just, like kind of going in and like looking into like getting a high level. I think that curiosity is really like what I would say.
Okay. This next question is for Nafisa. You're coming from, not directly a medical company, but making huge contributions to medical AI and open science. What are thoughts in terms of the skill sets that you see, the opportunities for, and I just want to say, most of our questions were clinical AI, and that's our topic, but we have to understand the pathway for getting to medicine is different. Actually, it's different in the UK, different in Australia, different in Africa, and different in the US. And sometimes you're not really yet in medical school, but you're on this pathway. So maybe we can make the conversation a little more diverse for people who other people who may be watching too. Nafisa, but I'm curious to hear your comment. I'm sure Matt Lungren is too.
Yeah, sure, I can comment on that. I work at Facebook for people who are just joining in Facebook AI research team. And we get to work with a lot of external partnerships. So our philosophy is like, you know, like AI in medicine is not one thing, it's many things. And no matter like which problem you focus on solving in the space, you're gonna have to work with cross-functional teams. You're gonna have to really rely on complementary expertise. For example, like we have engineers and scientists with computer science backgrounds who are like experts in computer vision, right? But that is not enough to work on medical imaging problems. So we team up with radiologists at NYU and work together. And the key here, I think I want to highlight, and people have touched on this as well, the key is your ability to work with cross-functional teams is going to make things happen. So you have to be able to bridge. You don't have to be a doctor who has like perfect computer vision skills as well, because you cannot, we simply don't have time to learn everything on our own, right? So you're gonna work as part of the team, no matter you choose which direction to go. So we have people, we work with MDs externally. We work with various groups of people who are engineers who also do research. We have PhDs, we have people without PhDs, just like undergrad degree in CS, but that's what it takes, really, your ability to identify, speak the same language, meaning like you understand the needs and the problems and you're able to solve it together. That's one thing. The second thing is, I think, there's also a thing about you cannot throw AI in every problem in medicine and then expect it solves it, right? Sometimes you have to just use simple linear regression models instead of fancy machine learning models, and you come to that conclusion by working together. Like, hey, so yeah, this is like a very interesting opportunity right now for everyone. I think really doesn't matter what your degree is, but you're gonna work with somebody who has a different degree. You're gonna work with somebody who comes from a different background, and that's what we also do at Facebook. Hope that answers the question.
And I'll chime in on that too, from just like an industry perspective. So I love what Nafisa said. The way I often say that is, know what your superpower is. And it doesn't need to be just a degree, right? I mean, it can be. If you've gone through and gotten a PhD in something, you have a superpower. You have a deep area of knowledge that you've probably pushed further than almost anybody else. But that superpower can also be incredible communication skills, can also be product management, understanding the need in a market, can be design or UX, can be collaborate. There's so many things that you can have a superpower in. And I think the key to AI in any industry, and probably extremely prominently in healthcare, is go out and find people whose superpowers complement yours. It's going to be really hard. And this is, you know, part of, if we start getting into some of the startup scene in this, it's really hard to build out a competency in the technical, in the entire healthcare industry, and in the entire transformational or business application or whatever type of application you're doing. But be awesome and amazing and the best at one of those, and find people who can bring the rest. But also know enough about the rest so that you can ask the right questions, engage in the conversation. I mean, in my organization, I have data scientists who have forgotten in the last hour everything I know about AI. And that's okay, because it's their job to be brilliant and to drive the boundaries of what's possible with data science. And it's my job to bring the right folks in so that gets applied to solve problems that matter in the world. So I think that's important too, is not trying to, never thinking and having kind of the hubris that you're going to do all this on your own, but know what you're excellent at.
So I'm going to ask a question about imposter syndrome. Okay. I mean, and if anyone here on this panel says that they haven't experienced it, then we're going to kick you out. But, you know, this is like, I mean, I'll tell you, even this is something that I struggle with today. And I sometimes, you know, like this weekend, I actually participated in a datathon, you know, with the Mimic dataset. This was the first time. And it's just so intense. You have these really smart people all over the world, and they're coding and they're doing all these amazing things. And then they ask me a question and I have the aha moment. I'm like, oh yeah, this is how I'd approach this, or this is something. And so tell us one time you felt maybe not good enough to belong to the team you're in or you're trying to get into, and how you tackled that, and how you balance that and how you're hopefully keeping on learning, so that, because this is such a changing field. I'm not going to pick on names, but I'm curious to hear a few opinions from this panel: imposter syndrome, overcoming it, and continuous life learning.
I'm willing to start that, because I think, you know, I'm coming from the least technical background, right, as I said. And when I sit down in a conversation with, you know, folks like Sharon and Andrew and, you know, all these brilliant people, immediately, you know, within a few sentences, I really don't get I'm not getting a lot of what they're talking about. And either I can sort of, you know, do the classic human thing, which is to protect ego and say, okay, fine, I'm nodding my head as if I'm agreeing, but I'm really not getting it. Or I'm, you know, quickly Googling on my phone to try to figure out what they're talking about. Or I can, you know, again, I can take a step back and say, let's take a beginner's mind. I love this sort of, you know, philosophy concept in general, because if I approach it with curiosity, I'm willing to ask the questions and have zero concern as to whether the question that I'm asking, that I want to know the answer to, reveals that I don't know something. That if you can put that aside, then I think that's ultimately how learning happens. And again, between that beginner's mind sort of philosophy and then really a willingness to make mistakes, again, drawing on a very creative arts sort of background. I mean, you know, you write your first essay or paper or whatever, that's not the final draft. You go, it's iterative. You show it to others, you get comments. And if you don't do that, you know, you won't be able to present your best work. And I think, again, it ties into some of the, I guess, mindset that you bring to the table. And, you know, again, I'm fortunate to have such amazing colleagues that are willing to tolerate, you know, my ignorance. But I think showing up with that attitude and then coming back and saying, I looked into what you said, or I thought a little bit more about what you said, and I've got a few more questions that, again, maybe I'm going to not ask the right question, but that's really, I think, where the genesis of this field is so, you know, exciting. It's really what I enjoy the most. And again, there are moments when you're, man, I just don't get reinforcement learning. I don't get triplet loss. I don't understand, you know, there's just things I can't do mathematical proofs, right? And I know where my limitations are, I think. And then, as Judy pointed out earlier, how to identify people that can fill those gaps to accomplish something that I think is possible, you know? So I don't know if that's a helpful approach, but that's sort of how I look at it.
Can I quickly jump in? And there is imposter syndrome on the other side. So I've worked in startups with engineers, and yes, you can sit in a room where they're talking about, you know, really complex mathematical issues, and then they ask you the most basic medical question, and you're caught off. You're like, well, that's so obvious, but they don't know medicine.
I don't know medicine.
Yeah, exactly. It's both ways. I can look at a prostate MRI scan and tell you exactly what's happening, whereas a coder doesn't know. So your skill set is unique. So don't be worried about imposter syndrome, because you know what you know, they know what they know. You're sitting in the room together to figure out what you both don't know and try and figure out the problem.
I thought we were supposed to be talking about our own imposter syndrome. You just called everyone else out.
I have it too, don't worry.
It's bad Santa.
It is. Can I just say, for doctors, coding is terrifying. And you know, the imposter syndrome for doctors is, I've written code and now I have to show someone else my code. That's a horrible feeling. Everyone's gone through it. I've gone through it all the time. I still go through it all the time. The only thing I can say is machine learning PhDs also write bad code. So everyone's in the same boat. It's not, no one writes good code unless they're a software engineer. And you don't need to write clean, perfectly designed code to do machine learning research.
You do for
just jump in.
approval.
Research.
Actually,
I would.
Go ahead.
I was going to jump in and say, you know, as someone who does write code, I have a ton of imposter syndrome about it. You know, I have a computer science background in school, but there were definitely many times during school where I didn't think, you know, I was potentially good enough to be doing computer science, and I didn't think of myself as an engineer. And I remember the night before I started, you know, my first job at Nines, I was so stressed out because I was like, what if I fail? And so I don't even think, you know, having that degree really, you know, says like, you know, bye-bye imposter syndrome. And I think it's just something, you know, you have to work through.
It never goes away, right? I mean, like we're all doing something new, like especially when you're in research. So it doesn't matter how many years of experience you have and what you have studied. Is it your field or is it a new field? I think you're gonna always have that syndrome, and it's okay. It means you're like, aware that you need to keep learning, and there is a humility in it, and you're doing research. We are answering unknown questions every day, and that's fine. And we fail a lot, and we learn.
I think I'm literally in a PhD program because of imposter syndrome. Can we discuss this opportunity cost? I started out as a classics major back in undergrad, and I did graduate with that degree with computer science. So I'm like, Matt, we kind of like sing bards or whatever. I don't know. So like that's stuff. I mean, I still love that, but after graduating, I didn't feel technical enough. I did software engineering like internships, but I became a product manager at various startups as well as at Google. And going into the PhD, I was like, I just spent my time like 90% on emails. Like, how am I supposed to code again? And like expect to do AI, which I actually had no background in undergrad. My undergrad institute, Harvard, did not believe in like neural networks. So coming to Stanford was like a big shock because even the English department uses neural networks. So like I definitely felt it the entire time. And I literally have arguably sacrificed a large portion of my life towards trying to combat the feeling of not being confident in my technical ability when I have a bunch of professors telling me like, you are way technical. And I'm like, I'm way not. Like, I just feel like I can't be like a crazy hacker. But now I've gained that confidence. And I think that's one of the biggest things I've been able to get from the program.
Yeah, something that really helped me overcome my imposter syndrome. I feel like whenever I started a new role, I would experience it. When I started my first class in undergrad, when I had my first class in grad school, when I started my postdoc, when I was starting my faculty position. But I think what really helped me get over it is being very honest to myself about what are my strengths, kind of like what Karley mentioned, what am I really good at? But also at the same time, knowing areas where I can become better, and then reaching out to people that can help me improve that skill set. So maybe if I want to better understand clinical medicine, maybe I'll keep annoying Matt with emails or try to schedule a meeting. But just being honest with yourself and really trying to improve yourself, because I think it's very easy to see successful people. There's a selection bias and then judge yourself against that. But everyone's good at something. And I think just finding what you're good at and what is passionate to you can go a long way.
Yeah, I plan on having imposter syndrome my whole career. And what I mean by that is if you have imposter syndrome, it means you're surrounded by people who are smarter or more knowledge about you or in a topic than you. And I think that is the single best way to learn and grow. But I experience it on a weekly basis. And I think some of the advice I've gotten is fake it till you make it. If I could strike one phrase from the English language, it might be that expression. I think ask questions till you understand, but do your homework. If you're going to ask a lot of questions, when you get answers, go double down on that and understand the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, so your questions become more and more sophisticated. But I embrace it, because if when I'm in a meeting, when I'm in a conversation and I realize I'm way out of my depth, it means I've got the best chance to learn and grow as a professional and a thinker in this space.
Awesome. So one question that I have is one question that we actually had is that many, first of all, on the chat, there are so many questions. Really, we're not going to get to them through this hour. So please keep looking at the chat. And I just actually want to give a shout out to John Jackson, who says he started learning all this stuff 1 year ago. And on Monday, he's starting a new job. Kudos. I mean, that's fantastic. Really just trying to shame us after imposter syndrome, but really, I mean, congratulations. And I really wish you the very, very best. So one thing that medicine is not very friendly to is, these people who are not seen as real doctors, and that usually comes in because when people hear you have an MPH or an MBA, or you even touched a computer. In fact, I'll be honest, when anyone has an IT problem near me, I even look away and even dictate even louder and just shy away from even helping them, because you don't want to be known as the IT person, or you're not clinical enough. So really, how can people keep up their other interests? People coming through medical school interested in music, acting, playing the violin, and doing AI, and they really love it. But sometimes our system really stifles that, at least the American system stifles that interest, and can really be shameful. And I personally have experienced it. So what advice do you have to other people who have other interests, including medicine or even beyond medicine, who are watching? Really nothing?
I can say something on the other side, which is also true. Like working on applied AI, sometimes people will judge that a little bit. They're like, oh, how much are you pushing the core AI technical envelope? And I definitely felt enough pressure that I did work on the core AI stuff as well. And that is my main thesis topic now. But like, there is pressure, I would say, in terms of like perceived like, oh, value to this field. But I think if you just lean in and you're like, I genuinely enjoy this, or I genuinely want to like work on this problem, you will still get to find that community. And I think at least from the AI side, like the AI medical community is pretty big now, or like, and it's featured at NeurIPS. Like you can publish those things there, and you can be like part of that big community. So yeah, I think it's for the better now, but it definitely, there's a little bit of that.
I would say leverage your interests as much as you can. For example, like this question mentions, like you also have interest AI and healthcare. To get there, you need to some basic understanding and comfort level with machine learning, right? Like you can use machine learning to make music. You can use AI to make art or some creative applications as part of your learning process. So you are not like necessarily just learning to use machine learning in health care, but you can like be more open about it, because you learn every time you use machine learning for a new application, you learn a lot about the limitations of AI itself, right? So that's what we learn. Like, for example, we have like models work perfect for computer vision for natural images, regular images. And when you try to do that in medical imaging, you start developing new methods to handle that. So I think this is perfect. If you have more interests, it just like helps it as a new platform for you to practice your other core interests to your side interests. And then I'm not saying it to say one is important than the other. It's just like if you chose one career but have several interests, go for it. To be fair, that's how I got to where I am, because I never gave up on my interests, and my pursuit was maybe challenging, but not a traditional way in any form. So you just like follow what's most interesting for you, and you just like consistently follow up on that.
I guess maybe I'll have a slightly different opinion to that. Instead of trying to keep my interests and my work similar, I actually try to keep them slightly different. Because whenever I do the other thing, so let's say if I enjoy playing sports. For me, if I've had a really tough day, I'll go on a really hard bike ride. And then that just clears my mind. It makes everything fresh for me, so that when I do go back to work, I can come in with this new energy that I may not have had before. So knowing what may work best for you could also be a different option.
Very healthy form of stress relief, I would have to say. Will not comment on my own.
Netflix.
So, I noticed that the physicians actually are very quiet, and I mean, the system can, in fact, actually, when I applied for fellowship, actually, one of the comments at that point was that, why do I need to teach someone who does informatics IR? So it's not just things that you're struggling with or your competences, it's other things in the environment that we are struggling with. And actually, there's one comment, I saw previously in the chat, I think from Matt, who says the advice he gives medical students is to be 10,000x the medical student. You have to work extra hard if you have any other interest, because those, when you make a mistake, which will happen, people will always go like, well, if they were not doing this IR, these IT things, maybe they would be a better clinician. So you have to be a very, very, very strong clinician. And almost it's like what it feels to be, a physician of color. Even for a simple procedure, you have to almost do it 10 times more because you have so much to prove. And so I'm actually really curious to hear from the physicians if you've had, or if you're noticing some of these things, and what advice you'd give to the students who may be watching on how to navigate some of these challenges.
I can comment on that. And in fact, the reason that I ended up leaving clinical medicine was because of that kind of attitude. I was in a post in a hospital in London as a consultant, or attending, as you say in America. And I was so keen to go and do AI stuff that I asked my boss, can I go 2 days a week and go and work with this startup and do AI stuff? And he said, no, you're either all in medicine or you're nothing. And he kind of just triggered something in me. And I said, well, fine, I'm going to go and do this and prove that I can go and do it. So I just left. And from then, I never looked back. And sometimes it takes a little bit of a push as well as a lot of pull by your own interest to do that. And it made me reflect that medicine as a career is intensely demanding, and it demands a lot of focus and training. And I completely agree with you, Judy, when you say some of the doctors who are completely focused on their clinical work may look at you playing around with coding and think you're just wasting your time. But as long as you're putting in the time and effort in the medicine to get to where you need to get to, and you're able to focus your energies elsewhere in your free time or your research time, then you should do it. Humans have evolved to have multiple interests. we all have things pulling our brains in different directions. So if you're watching this webinar, you are by definition interested in doing something just outside of medicine, and go and do it. But only go and do it if it super interests you, if you feel that push. And like Judy says, if your environment around you is not supportive of it, change your environment. That's what I have to say on that.
I'll say something here as well. I think the environment has been changing in the last few years. So we all started this earlier in the piece when medical AI was this exciting new thing that people were not very sure about. But we teach a lot of students, we teach a lot of trainee doctors and so on. And my experience now is that the clinical teams, at least where I am, are really, really excited to have someone who knows something about AI on board. And there seems to be fewer barriers than there were. That I agree, we've all had that experience where everyone was like, oh, why are you spending your time on this? But it seems to be a transition away from that. And certainly as we move, say, 5 years into the future from now, a lot of the colleges are going to be asking about AI expertise for a core component of their workforce. For some of their workforce, they'll need those skills. Our college in Australia has recommended that every radiology practice has an AI expert radiologist. And you need to have a group of people who are trained that way. And we're going to have to put incentives in place to make that happen. So I think it is changing. It's just such a new field that, for a while, everyone was like, it's exciting, but are we actually going to spend money on it? And no one wanted to. No one wanted to take away from your clinical time and so on. But this year we've started our first AI fellowship in my hospital. We've actually managed to get funding for that, where someone does a couple of days a week, AI learning and research as a radiologist. And that wouldn't have happened 2 years ago. So I think it's moving there. Obviously, because of my interest, we're out in front, but it is moving there across the field, I think.
So, we're coming close to 15 minutes to go. And one of the things that I would like to hear actually is, one of the questions that's come up is mentorship, right? So most people on the panel have talked that you have to be embedded in an interdisciplinary team, right? And, actually really everyone on this panel has the luxury of being, working in such a team. So how do people who are interested in this space reach out, get on a team? What sort of practical advice would you give them? And and including this practical advice is that phenomenon blog post that you don't want to be named in the negative by Luke here, but what are some of really like practical stuff that people can do I'm not going to repeat the courses because there's a big discussion on that on the YouTube chat, so you can look there, but I'm curious to hear what people think is more practical in terms of mentorship, really getting started and growing in this space.
So let's say you cold called a few people and they all rejected you or like ghosted you or something. I'd probably suggest working on a project that you think might be valuable within, there are open data sets out there. There are things like that. This is coming from the AI side. Working on a project and showing some results, maybe not like going completely to fully publishing it, but having something such that you can start a conversation. And of course, be listening as you're in that conversation, say, hey, I don't have any expertise in this. I tried this and I really want to push this forward. This is basically proof of work that I'm interested in this area. But I know that this isn't it. I know this isn't like exactly what I should be doing. Can you give me advice? And then that can turn into something a bit more.
Yeah, that's a great point. One thing is to see what's out there, open data sets. There's also a lot of open source projects you can contribute to and kind of show that your interest before reaching out to others, asking questions about it or looking for mentorship if you want to do it independently. There are public challenges. There are more and more in AI and medicine in a lot of major ML conferences, and also we see in a lot of medical conferences happening. So that gives you access to the community and more peers, more mentors. I also want to put it out there, most of big companies in the industry, like I'm from Facebook, so we have internships and we have AI residency programs. And it's not just for people coming from computer science background. For example, AI residency program is 1 year full-time position where you could be coming from a different background and you are not sure if you want to do grad school yet or what, but you have some interest in the space and you want to do well-defined projects with mentors, and that's what you can do. And I don't think we're the only company that offers that. Other big tech companies do that too. So I think I would suggest people to reach out, look for that kind of opportunities, and then you get to work with experts in more of a cross-functional teams.
Yeah, to expand upon that maybe a little bit more, sometimes it can be hard to find other like-minded people too. So there's a lot of opportunities to join like meetups, and there's a lot of local machine learning groups. And maybe that's a really nice way to get 2 or 3 other people. Maybe you can have weekly calls with them. And it's always nice to have a chance to bounce ideas around so that it really helps you work in a team together. And then you have a lot of different avenues where you can share that work too later.
Yeah, I guess I could put in a quick plug for just, I think the learn by doing. And again, if you're, as Sharon said, that scenario where you're just nothing, you have no other resources, no like-minded individuals, like really just not a lot of, and maybe you're not ready for that internship or able to take a year or whatever to do that. Or, I feel like, I'll put a plug in for Jeremy Howard's Fast AI. He is just a phenomenal individual. Another person that came from a non-technical background initially and just is, he's brilliant. And he's tried to create an environment in which anybody can not only get in and start to feel comfortable very quickly, but he's got a very just great way of building that community online so that folks can find, others, get to know other people and sort of his discussion groups and other fora. And I just, I feel like there's been several, at least in my, limited network that was their first entry into this world. And then, now they're coming up, they're winning challenges, they're doing amazing things. And they found a network of communities, either of folks that have medical data and want to do it from that side, or folks that are, purely technical coming at it saying, is there anyone that wants to work on this? And that community, I think, is one good example of a place where, again, I find it's the low barrier entry and a lot of like-minded individuals.
To just add on. Oh.
I was just going to say, we have industry fellowships at my business as well for doctors who want to understand how to get things regulatory approved and how to do the health economics on it. You don't necessarily have to be interested in the coding side of AI to be able to get AI into clinical practice. There are lots of other bits and pieces to the hurdle, and I know that Karley will understand this process as well, coming from the industry side. It's not just about building a perfect model and clinically validating it. It's got to be regulatory approved, you've got to have a health economics argument, you've got to have a business sales team. And you might be interested in those aspects of getting medical technology into patients' hands.
Yeah, and just kind of like piggyback off Matt there. Like Jeremy is someone who's super active on Twitter, and so if you're kind of like figuring out like how do I get involved with these communities, the Twitter AI community is really active. You know, you don't have to be reaching out to, you know, the most famous person there is. Like there's so many people out there that you can reach out to and you can reply, and like discussions like happen on Twitter a lot, as well as like, you know, LinkedIn is actually a really amazing tool to, you know, like understand someone's background a little bit better and send out, you know, an email asking, you know, like a cold email saying like, hey, can we talk? You know, I have a question about this X thing. And I found people are actually pretty responsive to cold emails if they are thoughtful and tailored to you as a person. I know like if someone emailed me and, you know, had a specific question, I would probably answer. I mean, there's no really reason not to. And I found that to be very true generally in the AI community.
Totally. I think, you know, a lot of us get emails all the time, and everyone's nice. Everyone answers. Like there are exceptions, obviously. But one thing that I'll just add, particularly in the setting of a pandemic at the moment, is that there is one particular barrier to medical AI research, and that's locality. That sometimes it's very hard to share data, particularly with an individual student, across national lines or state lines and so on. And so one thing you have to consider when you're reaching out to people who could possibly be mentors for you is, are they close to you or can you go to them? It just happens to be this particular issue around sharing of medical data that can make it more difficult. So just something to keep in mind, but it's not an absolute thing. I've worked with people interstate before, but it can be harder.
Okay. So Luke, I'm going to respond to your email. I received it. It's in the works, and I'll get to it.
Is that the one from July?
It's scheduled for Q3 2021. Don't worry, Luke.
So, you know, here coming on the home stretch. First of all, at the end of this is not the last question. I will ask what you're excited about because I want some good answers. I'll leak the question so that people can think about it. But the question that I want to ask now is, you know, these last 2 weeks I've been very, very appreciative of my job. And the reason why I've been appreciative of my job is because I realized, I take it for granted that I have the privilege to ask and answer any question that I want in my workplace. We know this is not directly related, but looking at people and friends like I know, like Timnit, who you know, is doing research but struggling with a big blowout for, you know, doing research and being bold enough to ask these questions. So I want to hear the comments from the panelists, not whom you support or whom you do not. We have a very, very diverse panel here from academics and, you know, Telerads and GA and Facebook to really figure out where are these organizations and groups of the future where we can be bold enough to do AI research that improves patients' lives. If you do not answer, I'm going to pick on people.
I'm very disappointed with what happened. And though on the one hand, so I have spoken with friends at Brain right now, and it's a really tough time there for them. I guess like, I think a lot of them thought, you know, like, yeah, we could do whatever, we can say whatever we want because we're researchers. But I guess like there is now more and more based on this situation, a defined line saying, you know, well, actually you have to do what is in the company's interest. And I think like academia has often served as that, you know, like this is where you can go to say whatever you want. But in industry, it's not always the case. And I think this definitely drew precedent for a lot of people because a lot of people were expecting being able to do whatever they want. I think a lot of people cited like Bell Labs, and apparently they were, as they were getting jobs there, being pitched it that way as well. You know, like this is the same, you just get paid a little more, a lot more. But like, I guess I've always been very cynical from all these companies because I've worked in them, and I know that the bottom line is what they're thinking about. And that as researchers there, you are probably a marketing tool or a recruiting tool more than anything. So I don't know. I feel like we need to establish from the ground up as individuals, instead of at the company level, some of the guidelines we want for AI, and establish those such that it's easier for people to speak up within a company because there are guidelines that we as a community have established. I don't know.
One of the interesting arguments that I heard as a reaction from everything that happened at Google was about the sanctity of the tenure process in academia, because once you have tenure, then maybe you don't have any limitations about what sort of research you can engage in, what sort of statements you can make, and what sort of questions you can really ask. And maybe as people are trying to decide the pros and cons of an academic research career versus an industry research career, perhaps that is another factor that can play into it.
I've certainly heard a lot of people recently say that this has turned them off industry, which, you know, it's quite remarkable how much of a difference this has made in some people's thinking. I will say, in reverse, we've also seen in the same time period a tenured professor emeritus also, you know, have a blow up on Twitter, and there's now lots of stories coming out that this was going on the whole time he was a professor, and the workplace environment wasn't very good. One thing I'll say about medical AI in particular, when we're looking at the machine learning community more broadly, one nice thing about medical AI, it's not all perfect, but ethics is in some way baked in, at least at some level, that patient safety, if nothing else, drives a lot of medical AI research. And that means you have to be thinking about some of these issues. It's not the same thing as, you know, these diversity and inclusion issues. It's not the same thing as ethics more broadly, but there is this foundational basis to medical AI that doesn't exist outside of it, that seems to make the field maybe a little more welcoming and a little more open to new ideas. And hopefully that will continue to grow.
I would just say, like, I mean, I'm not sure I have, like, you know, any perfect answer here. And I was really, really sad to, you know, read about Timothy's story. And I think one of the reasons I joined a startup was because I wanted to be part of building a specific culture. And I was willing to kind of, you know, not go to like a larger company that had, you know, those like processes in place, and because I want to be part of building those processes and building a culture that I wanted to be a part of, and calling things out early. And, you know, as we're building these mechanisms to deploy and, you know, like systems that could potentially harm patients, like I wanted to be there like at the beginning and not later at the end where I, you know, was calling it out for, you know, like potential harmful effects. And so I would definitely say there are a lot of like smaller companies where, you know, you can have that effect. And so I would say that.
So moving on to the final question, it could be just wishing our viewers happy holidays. You know, what are you excited about? You know, it could be just showing off your Christmas gear, Hugh here, but you know, what are you excited about? Just like in a few seconds, because I know it's at the top of the hour, and Hugh really has to go to bed.
I do, thank you. What am I most excited about? I'm really interested in projects like NINES. I think AI-assisted teleradiology is something that's very exciting. And I think it's going to help solve some global inequalities around the provision of expert radiology around the world. So that's what I'm very excited about.
Sharon?
I'm excited about, I know we chatted about level 5 AI and medicine. Yeah, I'm excited about that. I'm pretty sure, if I were to bet, who is it gonna be? Probably Hugh. I mean, see his outfit, it basically is screaming level 5. So I'm gonna put my bets on him.
Luke.
I'm excited about the next couple of years. We're going to transition to doing a lot more translational research. So a lot more systems being used in practice. And alongside that, a lot more focus on safety, on edge cases, on what makes these systems work and when they don't. And concurrently building a medical workforce to monitor these systems. I'm really excited about the process.
Nafisa?
Oh, I continue to be more excited about the open research we're doing at Facebook and also happening everywhere. We have a couple more open source releases coming up very soon around the holidays, so stay tuned. And it's a great time to do AI in medicine research.
Awesome. Akshay?
I'm excited about vaccines for 2021. And from a machine learning standpoint, I think I'm just excited to do more with less data and reducing the burdens for collecting large data sets. I feel like there's a lot of interesting research in those fields.
Okay. Karley?
Sure, I'm excited about my 10-month-old experiencing her first Christmas and healthcare and AI leaving its infancy. I will tell you one thing I'm excited about is that a ton of you guys probably attended RSNA different sessions. This is my 4th year in a row going and talking to people about AI. This was the first year I had more conversations about how do we adopt and leverage it as opposed to like, is it real and can it be trusted? So I'm excited about this movement out of infancy we're seeing in the translation.
Olivia?
Yeah, I think Karley really hit it on the head for what I'm excited about in that space. I think the fact that we can have these sorts of conversations and, you know, doctors and engineers and researchers can really start coming together, and it's not like we're fighting each other, you know, it really should be all of us working together. And I think I'm so excited about that. And on a personal note, I'm excited to go to see my parents for Christmas. I've been self-quarantining for 2 weeks before, and so I'm going to drive down and see them. And so it's been a while.
Awesome. Matt?
Yeah, I get excited about all kinds of stuff in this area, but I love the open science to sort of all the initiatives, especially by the large groups, companies that are trying to work on that. We obviously believe heavily in that. I expect to see a lot more of that coming. On the translation piece, just like Luke said, I'm really excited about learning from the trials, right? Learning how the human-computer interaction affects the use case, but also the ecosystem surrounding the use case. Those are just fascinating questions, and gets into all kinds of fun sociologic and other technical areas that are just really exciting. And then finally, I think just from the development side, I love branching in beyond just the single image, right? Learning how to compare image to image, learning how to incorporate EMR data to learn context. These are the tasks that we do, and we're getting closer to building that sort of cognitive work that we do in this field. So anyway, so basically I'm excited about everything that's happening, including the vaccine. So yes, it's all happening right now.
Okay. So I'm just going to say thank you everyone for joining us today. You heard from really a diverse panel, academia, startup, big companies, GE, you know, non-medical companies, but really moving the mark for us, Facebook. So thank you for joining us. You heard about imposter syndrome, some tips of mentorship, how to get started. So hopefully we're going to hear some success stories. Please on the chat, the next AIMI session will be in the new year. And I think that's going to be somewhere in January. I don't have the date, sorry. But Judy's excited because tomorrow at 2 p.m. I get the vaccine. So, so happy holidays, everyone, and keep safe and see you next year. Goodbye.